All right,
Yeah.
our last story comes from Security Week, and the title here is "Beware of Shadow AI." Shadow IT's less well-known brother. When I read this, I was taken back to the interview that we did on Getting Defensive, shameless plug, with Dave Shackelford, who talked
Yep.
about a friend of his who was a CISO that recently resigned because, at least the assertion was, concern over AI. And I think it's probably broad, lots of different reasons why that happened. But for me, this feels like trying to hold back the tide.
Yeah.
And I say that because, like, these are not necessarily even apps that you install, or there's websites that you visit. They're on your phones. They're on your, like, they are becoming so pervasive that it's a problem. But anyway, the whole, the point of this article is that we generally lack governance around user-driven use of AI technologies. We're certainly seeing, and we complain endlessly about how companies are embracing AI and displacing workers and whatnot, but that's not what we're talking about here. We can debate that all day long. This is more where employees are taking it upon themselves to identify and use AI technologies in furtherance of their jobs, and
Right.
the
That
risks
isn't
that creates.
authorized
Right.
or sanctioned or provided by a corporate IT department.
Correct. And so this article goes through some of the risks that are associated with that, such as data leakage. You've got employees who are, one of the great examples, that I don't. It's a. I'm just going to put out as an example. I'm not saying this is necessarily a problem, but, like, there was a time when Grammarly was a big plugin for email and for your word processors. But as you were typing, it was not just all happening in your browser. It was actually sending whatever you typed off into Grammarly's cloud. And if you didn't have an agreement with Grammarly to transit confidential information, that could create a problem. Not even just a security problem, right? It could create a legal and contractual problem, because if you're typing something that has this covered under a non-disclosure agreement or some kind of trade secret or what have you, you could be creating inadvertently a serious problem. Or if you were typing up case notes for a medical provider, like, you're sending HIPAA covered data or GDPR covered personal data to a provider. And so I think that's one of the big issues I see, is not even necessarily kind of core security risk, but like legal risk. And then when you talk about on the generative AI side, you got lots of people now starting to use AI to write code. And one of the big complaints about generative AI is that it's basically stealing code. And I'm using the word stealing in scare quotes, but it's not writing necessarily the code completely on its own. And so then you get into the question of who owns the code that your employee had their AI agent write.
Yeah.
And now, when you as a company go off and find some kind of AI technology to help your developers write code like that, that's on you, the company, to work through that issue. But when it's something being driven by an employee, and then suddenly, surprise, you're being sued for, to my awareness, this hasn't really happened yet, but I can envision at some point companies being sued for, trademark or patent or some trade secret infringement, because they incorporated AI provided stuff into their code base unknowingly.
No, I agree. But I also feel like, back to your first point, you're screaming into a hurricane. This is just going to keep happening.
It is.
Because everything in its brother's got AI integrated now. And it's almost a panic by all of these providers to integrate some level of AI to stay competitive in their mind.
Right.
And I think for our employees, an existing tool suddenly turns on AI, they try it. They're like, hey, this makes my life easier. Great. And they don't know or care about these problems. That's not their problem to solve. But it's also very, very difficult to police this without some pretty heavy oversight. And I think the reality is some bad things are probably going to happen before most companies take this seriously. It sucks.
I agree,
but
I don't know what the end game is. This article recommends some some responses like robust AI governance policies, paired with education and granular access controls. But I think this space, as you kind of alluded to, is moving and evolving so fast. My head spins when I think about like what would a policy say.
And to be clear, I think taking this to the next step, you've got a policy that says you can only use company-sanctioned AI tools, and here's the list. Okay, great. Now, how responsive is that company to integrating new tools, or even understanding that a new tool got introduced to an existing approved tool, or that a new version had a massive AI overhaul? Or are we now becoming uncompetitive because we're not using the latest version of something that our competitor is using? Do we just have to accept some of this risk to stay competitive? I don't know that that conversation's even being had, much less what the right answer is. It almost feels to me, and this is very old school, but it was back in the day when we first started with SaaS tools. And there was a mindset of, hey, anything that's internet connected is not going to be acceptable to us. Well, now you can't get away from it. Every piece of software is internet connected in some way. I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. It's whether we in security like it, love it, hate it. I don't know that there's a lot we can do to stop it if we wanted to stop it. And by the way, it may not be the right call. It may be the right call for business to have this skill set and capability available. And we just got to deal with the fallout. But I don't know that any of us understand what that is going to be yet. And I think it's going to be a painful learning curve.
Yeah, I think you're right. And other than turning off the internet, I think this will be a very difficult thing to manage. One of the concerns I have with the AI governance policies and the employee training is that you're putting a lot on the employee. Not everything is advertised as AI, right? And
Right.
So I think that's when I read this, that's one of the concerns I have, is that AI is becoming so pervasive. It is in so many different things that when an employee uses something new, it almost certainly has AI in it, whether they know it or not.
Yeah. And it's being built into the core of the operating system. It's being built into their phones. It's being advertised every which way from Sunday as a normal, appropriate function. So if I take this to the nth degree and I'm a young hotshot developer and I can't use AI coding tools, do I want to be at your company? And that is a very real consideration. The flip side of this argument, if we only look at it from security risk side, we're missing the entire other side of this argument, which is what's the upside? What's the benefit? What's the perceived benefit? And this is a freight train coming down the tracks. I don't know that I want to get in front of it. Even if I know it may derail, it may just be one of these things that, right, wrong, or indifferent, we've got to just manage through it and see where this all ends on the other side, because I don't think it's stoppable at this point. And I don't know that it should be stopped. Honestly, I think there is value.
Yeah, I think at some point, and look, we've joked a couple of times around, there is a large part of the IT and in particular security world who is very skeptical and very opposed to AI on ethical reasons, on environmental reasons, on lots of reasons. There's probably a dozen reasons or more for that. And I personally may not disagree with a lot of them, but and I think there's a lot of comparison of whether people realize they're doing it or not. They're looking at AI through the same lens they looked at blockchain. It's a problem. It's trying to solve a problem that nobody really wants solved, was how I think a lot of people looked at blockchain. And personally, I agree with that. But I think that, I think AI is much more akin to the way we looked at cloud, or the way we went through cloud. Where if you rewind the tape back 15 or 20 years ago, there was the same sort of furor to put to cloud enable all of the apps. Yeah, to some extent, we still continue seeing it. Companies are still moving their stuff to SaaS, which is kind of a flavor of that. It's a consumption model, but there was kind of this irrational, let's just move everything to cloud because that's like the cool thing to do, and our stock
Well,
price
it's
will
also
benefit.
it's going to save us money. It's going to make us more agile and nimble.
Right.
And all of our competitors are doing it, so we've got to do it.
We have to do it. Right. And
Yeah.
and that, that was the thing for a while, and it started to mediate. Like, you don't see that as, you don't buy a web browser, or not web browser, you don't buy web browsers anymore, but like a word processor, you don't buy a word processor because it is cloud based, or like it's
Right.
you don't buy software now because it's cloud based or not cloud based. That is just an artifact of, or an aspect or attribute of the thing that you're buying. It's not necessarily a selling point. And I think that we're on the same trajectory with AI, that there will be a moderation at some point where we won't. I don't think it's going away. Like, I think the tide has come in,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's going to go away. The tide will go back out a little bit, but like, it's here. It is here. We're going to see not like a withdrawal of it, but I think we're going to see more focus on how to actually use it constructively and effectively, and then manage around the risk of it. But I think over time, as it becomes less, people are sticking it in every goddamn thing, whether it needs it or not. We have to manage through it. And I think
it'll iterate and get refined, but it's not going away.
But the concern I have is this is all happening at a time, unlike cloud, right? This is all happening at a time when governments are getting much more, and this is not I'm, pooping on regulations, but it's happening at a time when worldwide governments are really coming to wake up to the risk of data security, data privacy, and whatnot. And so I think there's this, like, the thing that is different now as opposed to what we saw with cloud is it's becoming more perilous. Like, if you don't manage it well, the downside, I think, is a lot more, it's a lot steeper than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we have this bias for everything is always the worst possible situation because we're in the middle of it. And our generation is always in the worst possible situation. And we're always at the edge of calamity. I think that there's a sociological aspect of that, which often the data doesn't prove out in a broad sense. And this is something I've done before. Like, everyone's like, it's the worst possible timeline. I'm like, I don't know. The amount of people in poverty is the lowest it's ever been. Child mortality rate's the lowest it's ever been. Like, I can point out a lot of things that, like, we've done a lot better. Access to clean water and a bunch of other things. Yeah, you can point out things that still suck, but some of the base core needs we've gotten a lot better at as a global society. Anyway, that's off topic.
Yeah, not disputing that. I guess what I'm saying is, it's threading the needle is harder because now it's not just about security. The problem that you have to navigate isn't just security. You have to worry about the FTC and data privacy regulators.
I hate to be blunt about it, but maybe some companies need to crash and burn for us to learn. And maybe that's the natural. And the other thing I want to mention that you were talking about earlier is the Gartner. You described the Gartner hype cycle perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you don't know the Gartner hype cycle, look it up. Like, we are perfectly in the middle of that. And the way you describe cloud and how it evolved is the exact following that. I imagine AI is going to do the same thing. So I don't know. I guess maybe I'm being naive. And I also feel like AI is being too broadly applied. Like, everything in its brother is being labeled as AI, and I don't think it's all the same. And I think that'll shake out too. And, the AI in my toothbrush is not the same as ChatGPT version 28 that's running our nuclear weapon systems for us. It's two different things.
I think that the risks are certainly not uniform. For example, when your AI thing is sending data to some central offsite place, that presents a different set of risks. Like, you've got to make sure that you have the right kind of data protection stuff, contracts with whoever you're using. Otherwise, not only are you exposed to breaches, but you could run into regulatory problems. AI as a means to perform business logic is also problematic. Like this was when I was with my last job, we worked a lot with bank regulators, and I suspect you may have seen some of this too. A lot of the regulations are around fairness and equity and things like that. And so when you take it away from a human and you put it onto some kind of AI machine to decide whether or not someone is eligible for a loan or or what have you, that becomes that becomes a subject to scrutiny and oversight. And so there's I think there's lots of ways to step into the hole accidentally. We talked about the potential pitfalls with intellectual property and whatnot. So I think you raise a really good point, and that I was not thinking about it, right? Like there's lots of different incarnations that we have to think through, and they're not all the same.
And to be clear, I think you're absolutely correct, and all those things are problematic. And I guess the approach I'm taking is, yeah, that shit's going to break and we'll have to fix it. But maybe it has to break before we get this right. I don't want it to break. I'm not hoping it's going to break, but I guess I've resigned myself to yeah, that's going to happen. We're going to have situations like, oh yeah, this AI model denied everybody from this zip code because of, whatever bias it has. All right, well, that informs the entire industry, and now new regulation comes into place. And for the next, we'll fix it, we'll get better. But in the short term, it's going to suck, and it's going to be unfair, and but I mean, yeah, it'd be nice if we avoided those problems. I don't know that we're going to avoid. I guess what I've resigned myself to, and I'm looking past this problem, is like we've already embraced this, and I think the only way to get better is to go through it, and that we are going to make a ton of mistakes and regret them and wish we had seen it first and wish we hadn't done it, but we're going to do it, and then we're going to get better at it. And hopefully it's not too painful as we learn that lesson.
So I think what you're saying is it'll be obvious in hindsight.
Yeah. And maybe, hopefully, we avoid some of this. And I know people are trying. I know there's some people who care. But I also know that the level of skill set applying AI across everything with a bit of code in it is not equal.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired and cranky and being fatalistic about AI.
I'm not sure you're being fatalistic as much as pragmatic.
Yeah, because I also see a lot of benefits that are undeniable. So, which is why I think it's not stopped. I guess it's like I'm through the stages of grief and I'm into acceptance at this point, because like I don't disagree with a lot of these concerns people bring up. I'm like, yeah, but you're not going to stop it. It's too compelling. You're just not. So now we just have to brace for it and manage our way through it.
I think the question for me is, are there practical things that we can do to minimize the damage?
I don't know. You know me. I am not a fan of government regulation.
No,
I think they have a lot of.
So I don't mean. I'm not saying government regulation. I'm talking about, like, in the spirit of this article, they're talking about having governance policies around AI and training your employees and whatnot. And I'm just not sure. Like, I think that can take you so far. But I think there's, as you've pointed out, I think there's this like super compelling argument combined with the reality that where AI is and is not necessarily super obvious in all instances. And so maybe like you can cut it off or mitigate it to some extent. But I guess on the other side, I think this might be an instance where this issue is going to be most problematic for the companies who ignore it and leave it up to their employees to go and do the innovation on their own, rather than at the company providing the tools that are acceptable to the company.
Yeah. The only caveat to that is the company's got to be responsive.
Yeah. But if they're not, if they're not, then it magnifies the problem, right? So it's right. It's going to be the responsive companies that are facilitating employee expectations and requirements that have a hope in hell of minimizing, probably not eliminating, but minimizing this challenge. It's the ones that pretend like it doesn't exist that I think are going to see the biggest issues, where employees are just off, figuring out how to do it on their own.
Right. And it becomes an unmanageable mess.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, once again,
So look for a forthcoming book on AI governance. No.
Yeah.
We're available for motivational keynote speaking.
It's it's an interesting time. I think we have to think about it again like cloud. We're on the cusp of the next big IT. I mean, it's already here. Like it's not going away. Yeah. The people who succeed in their IT careers are the ones that help organizations manage through it, whatever that means, on the security side, on the consumption side, on the implementation side, And so from a personal growth standpoint, factor that in.
Yeah. Yeah. One underlying thing that I'm not saying out loud that I should is, if your security team is just saying no, you're going to get run over by the business. And that's not effective and not helpful.
Your replacements will probably have a different perspective.
And it doesn't matter how right you are. Right doesn't matter in this case. This is an undeniable movement that if you stand in the way of, you will not be a benefit to the company, is my opinion.
Yeah. And as with everything, that is not a uniform statement about every industry, every company. But I think on average, that's the world we live in now.